Joe Burrow is awesome. I don't know what else to take away from it other than like this guy has an unbelievable amount of swagger. He wore a Big D Joe hat after the game while smoking a cigar in NOLA. He got fitted for a championship ring before the game itself. And then he backs it all up on the field by playing with what appeared to possibly be a broken rib after taking a huge shot at the end of the first half. And by playing with this, he never looked out of control. He didn't look out of control all season, looked very comfortable, makes all the throws, and it's hard not to be in love with the idea that he could be a franchise-changing quarterback.
If I was the Bengals, I'd start negotiating the contract now. I mean, you can do all your work on all the other, guys you're going to draft or potentially sign and look at free agency, but they're moving on from Andy Dalton, and Joe Burrow is going to be the guy. So why waste any more time, trying to evaluate him? I think you try to sign him. You're technically able to. You have the first pick, and you get him that playbook as soon as possible, so you don't have to worry about, an even longer learning curve for him with this new system. Now, the interesting thing and why this kind of collides for me, and I'll get to the game, or we'll talk about the game in a second, is if Joe Brady does move on to the NFL level, it's surprising to me that Zach Taylor wouldn't want to bring him in as his OC. Like, I think much like Arizona did with Cliff Kingsbury and Kyler Murray, if you're going to go all in on a number 1 overall pick and a quarterback, why not bring in Joe Brady instead of letting him go to the Carolina Panthers? Like, it doesn't make as much sense to me.
Well, what am I missing outside of the connection of, you know what? I don't even know what the hell the connection is. What's the connection with Joe Brady and Matt Rule? I don't even know. Joe Brady was with the Saints.
Yeah,
right?
I'm not aware of any Rule. Joe Brady's roots go back to obviously his time with the Saints, and then before that his time with Joe Moorhead. So who's looking like he's going to get the job out of Oregon as their offensive coordinator, moving on from Mississippi State. So I'm not exactly sure what the roots are there. Maybe just playing off of the success that he had at LSU, and it looks like David Tepper's willing to shell out some money, so maybe he's willing to give him a little bit of decent coin. I'm curious to see what Ryan has to think about it.
Brady, I'm not upset with anything we talked about the first 10 minutes, but I am upset that you didn't mention Joe Brady went to William & Mary. That is where I draw the line. So, yeah, I'm proud of that guy, which is what I can say as an old person. And he talked about it a few days ago during the media days about how his roots go back to Jimmy Laycock, who coached at William & Mary for like 50 years or something. He was at the pregame show when the Steelers played the Bills. So, and he's an offensive guy. So that's sort of where it started. But I think you're right. I don't know the link between Rule and Joe Brady. I don't know why, if you're Zach Taylor, you wouldn't immediately, your first call is to Joe Burrow's agent. Your second call is to Joe Brady, and get that sorted out right now. But Brinson's right. I watched probably 11 of the 14 or 15 games LSU played, and every week it was the exact same thing. And not only was the exact same thing in terms of how well Joe Burrow played, he got better. He got better against better teams. I think they played 7 teams in the top 10, and he dominated every last one of those teams, and to the point where you just couldn't make sense of how someone who was a day 3 pick probably coming into the season made the progress he made in such a short amount of time. You could even say it was a 12-month turnaround, in which case it's still mind-boggling what he was able to do, the level at which he was able to do it. I thought for maybe a series and a half in the championship game that, okay, this is for real. He's going to be rattled a little bit. Clemson got off to a pretty good start defensively, and then it just clicked, and that was a wrap. Justin Jefferson got involved. Jamar Chase did what he usually does. Thaddeus Moss was a big part of what they were doing. And then Clyde Edwards-Helaire got hot towards the end. And there were no answers for that Clemson defense, which we know with Brett Venables is one of the best defenses in college football. And they weren't blown out, but it was to the point where you felt pretty comfortable in the last quarter that Clemson, they had pretty much given up any chance they had to come back.
I thought Joe Burrow did something that we haven't seen in the past 2 years. And that he made Trevor Lawrence press. Like, he made Trevor Lawrence feel his presence from across the field. When you look at Trevor Lawrence's performance in this game, because these two are going to be, always compared to one another, because they're probably going to be the first overall pick in the next 2 drafts. In the second half, when it wasn't like the game was necessarily out of reach, but I think when LSU started to distance themselves Trevor Lawrence really started to press. He started to overstride. He started to try to put too much in the balls with the multiple overthrows, and he just looked out of sync. He looked out of rhythm. He looked uncomfortable. And it wasn't even necessarily times when there was that great of a rush from LSU or pressure. Granted, their defense did a good job, but there was times when he had enough room in the pocket or he had a clean pocket and he was missing some open guys. And that to me was more of him actually feeling the guy across from him, something that he really hasn't felt in the past 2 years. You can talk about their comeback versus Ohio State. That was kind of aided, though, by the officials with the controversial call and the fumble. That was a return potentially for a touchdown. Either way, it took off points for Ohio State. And then the Sean Wade targeting, getting him ejected, not only prolonged that drive, but took one of their better DBs out of the game. And so there was a little bit more help in that case. It almost felt like at times Trevor Lawrence was like, he felt helpless. As LSU started to kind of build a lead and get that momentum back, he just felt helpless playing in that environment, playing against what is just an offensive juggernaut in LSU with Joe Burrow at quarterback.
Ryan, you said before the national championship game, so this is not a knee-jerk react. Like, it's not like you're like, well, I saw that game. Because I think a lot of people would see that game and be like, well, you got to take Burrow over Lawrence. You would take Joe Burrow over Trevor Lawrence as a prospect, right?
Yeah, we talked about it here on this podcast back in December, and I brought it up. And right now, I would have taken him before the national title game as well. But just what he has done, Joe Burrow, and athletically, he is not even close to Trevor Lawrence. He might be able to keep up with Trevor Lawrence in a foot race, but if we're doing pass, punt, and kick, Trevor Lawrence is dominating that competition. And in a lot of ways, Trevor Lawrence played last night the way we saw Justin Herbert play when we were down on Justin Herbert. The difference is that's the first time Trevor Lawrence has played like that in 25 games or whatever it is, however long the winning streak was in his 2 years at Clemson. But I think in terms of consistency in the 2019 season, Joe Burrow is it. And I know, and Brady knows this, and he's talked about it, you can fall in love with the measurables, and I get all that with Trevor Lawrence, and he'd probably be a fantastic NFL player, and I have no doubt about that. But just what Joe Burrow was able to do, and the fact that he did it under some less than ideal circumstances last night, that made me feel a little better about the idea of going to Cincinnati and having to replicate that there to some degree. But yeah, I'm Team Burrow all the way, and I love his story.
I think he should be the first overall pick. I'll ask you guys this, though. If the roles were reversed, if Trevor Lawrence was playing in that LSU offense last night, would that game have been any different?
I don't think so. I think that LSU would. Yeah. I mean, I agree with you. Is what I'm trying to say. I agree with your hypothesis, and I think Trevor Lawrence. You're right. Like, I think Clemson pressed. And correct me if I'm wrong. Did their OC left or took South Florida's job?
He was still there. Tony Elliott and Jeff Scott. Jeff Scott's leaving for the USF job, but he hasn't left yet.
That's right. But I mean, like that. I mean, the reality is when you take another head coaching job and you're playing all that stuff, it takes off of your plate and all that. Clemson, after Travis Etienne scored, I saw a stat. He only ran the ball one more time. They got out of sync with what they wanted to do on offense. They felt. I think that there's a similarity, Brady, to the Chiefs and the Texans game, where it's like, I mean, holy bleep! Like, here comes the tidal wave, and especially going into the first half. And Dabo, you could see the frustration on his face when he was talking to whoever he was going into the halftime. But the 3rd and 19 DPI penalty, just brutal. I mean, it was a bad throw by Burrow. It was underthrown to get that penalty and to give LSU another chance. And then with 21 seconds left and no timeouts, after just using a timeout, they call the QB draw and Joe Burrow runs for like 27 yards. Ballsy as hell to call that play. Great execution by Burrow. He never panicked. He didn't try to get down and then set up a field goal. Got out of bounds. You knew they'd have multiple shots, and Clemson just got completely baffled in coverage. Thaddeus Moss, easy touchdown. That felt like, man, they're getting the ball back. That's a Patriot special. And so, yeah, I mean, like, I think you could just see Clemson press. You're right. And Trevor Lawrence, they had a 3 and out that was 50 seconds long. They had a touchdown pass to T. Higgins that was probably shouldn't have been offensive PI that would have gotten them back within 10. Maybe they come back and cover, who knows. But LSU you could feel the explosion of talent at wide receiver and at running back and on the offensive line. I mean, these guys just took off, and Trevor Lawrence played like crap. He just wasn't very good. Fumbled once. Missed a ton of passes high. I mean, that's just bottom line. It's fine. He's a great player. I would take him over Joe Burrow right now. I don't know about you, Brady, but he didn't play well.
No, he didn't play well. I mean, this is his worst performance, and this is coming off of a year where last year as a true freshman, he had arguably one of his best performances in a national championship game on the big stage. And so we've kind of seen both sides of this. And it's not like his first half was that bad. And Will, I'm glad you touched on the offensive pass interference that really wasn't, which is not shocking considering it was a Pac-12 officiating crew. And there's usually there's a little bit of controversy involving that group. But yeah, he just looked out of sync, out of sorts. But I think you touched on something that was even bigger with the lack of Travis Etienne in the second half. He was their best player, and they got away from him. And it wasn't just running the football. It was getting the ball to him in the passing game and the screen game, and they went away from that. And they lost one of their best wide receivers. I can't remember. I think it was it Higgins for a minute?
Higgins was gone for a large chunk of time after he took that shot from
to the thigh from Delpit, right?
Yeah,
and it's like, so he didn't really have as much. Like if you really look at the construct of the Clemson offense, like Galloway came out, their tight end who hadn't even a reception before the game, and you really got to credit Barrett Sallee with this because Barrett talked about it, the fact that they were kind of waiting on him all year. He all of a sudden had an impact in that game early on, and then they kind of went back to their normal, like, okay, if you're going to load up the box, we're going to throw outside to Higgins and Ross in one-on-one scenarios, and maybe Amani, Rogers in the slot a little bit. But if you look at the sum of the parts, it's not even close to what LSU has with Moss and what a mismatch he is, and with the three wide receivers in Chase Jefferson and Marshall, and then Clyde Edwards-Helaire. So once that momentum built, it just became insurmountable to stop. And then it's like Clemson just needed something to go their way, and nothing really did down the stretch. The OPI, the targeting call, and their middle linebacker, getting booted there, like all those things end up kind of adding it up to just never really being able to close the gap. That being said, Trevor Lawrence is younger. He's got more upside, more potential, and I think he will continue to keep growing and improving. I've got more concerns, I think, even though as great as Joe Burrow was, when you go to the NFL and you're going to a team that's the worst team in football the year before, there's going to be a lot of things you got to figure out. And what happens if the offense is going to be different, drastically different than what he ran with LSU? I think he's smart. I think he can learn it. But there's going to be a learning curve there, and there's going to be some adversity. And he might handle it well, but if it looks like what it did last year for LSU, then that's an average season, because that's what it was last year. I mean, he was average at best. And so he took this monumental leap largely due to Joe Brady, but he's not going to be with Joe Brady. So it's a different level. It's a different thing. I think Joe Burrow will be fine in the long run, but his situation next year and with the Bengals is going to be drastically different than what it's going to be like, or at least what he had this year.
Yeah, and look, it's possible that he ends up having A.J. Green, John Ross, Tyler Boyd. I mean, he could end up having a pretty nice group of weapons at Cincinnati. That offensive line, though, I don't think got enough credit for what it did after look, Brent, not to recap this whole game because we want to get in the draft stuff, and I'm curious about all these different players in this game, but Brent Venables had an incredible game plan out of the gate. That was it, like a 3-3-1 stack or whatever. I don't even know exactly what it was, but he was just bringing pressure all over the place. They punt and pinned LSU twice. They were getting after getting after Burrow, and then Joe Brady and the offensive staff made adjustments. And Venables didn't really have a counterpunch when it came to bringing his pressure. They started picking up pressure a little bit more. And the offensive line, and this is sort of my point with Cincinnati, the offensive line played awesome for that stretch from the second quarter to basically to the end of the game. They did a really good job of protecting Burrow, I thought. And he's not going to have that offensive line in Cincinnati. They have traditionally over the last few years had a pretty bad offensive line, and it's hurt.
And think about what they have to go up against twice a year. Baltimore's edge rushers and their defense with the pressure from Martindale, TJ Watt, the Pittsburgh Steelers defensive line, and then Myles Garrett. I mean, he's going to be back next year for the Browns. I mean, that's a lot of tough edge rushers you have to go up against within just your own division.